This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is June 13th, 2025.
I'm Scott Delaneboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, we have one more political party here in BC. We have 4 more ferries on the way. The federal government introduced its nation-building project legislation, and they're giving a big old bag of money to the military. If you want to give us a big old bag of money, go to patreon.com/politicos. Let's get into it. Those 3 independent conservatives got together, and 2 of them decided to launch a new party, 1BC.
So 1BC, 2 MLAs, and a splinter already. It's not a great sign when your splinter faction can't even remain together. Seriously, leftists get a bunch of crap for always splintering off into increasingly more niche subgroups, but damn, do these guys ever give them a run for their money on that?
Yeah, it's really weird because it was Dallas Brody who was expelled pretty much from the BC Conservatives, and then Tara Armstrong and Jordan Keeley said that's not right, so they left. So you get the sense these 3 all should get along, right? They all think the Conservatives under John Rustad are too moderate. And in her post announcing 1BC, Dallas Brody says they need a new party to, quote, combat the globalist assault on our history, culture, and families. They want to have a tax-free BC in the future. They want to defund the reconciliation industry. They want to eradicate gender ideology, end mass immigration. However you do that as a provincial party is up to you. Previous BC governments have tried. I'd gotten a good lesson in the division of powers through the Disallowance Act or powers of the federal government. And they also want to unapologetically advance pro-family policies. So it's pretty clear where they stand. What's not clear is why Jordan Keeley didn't feel like this was who he wanted to sit with. He released a statement today saying, I wish them well, but I would like to know more about this party, and if our values and priorities align more closely in the future, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of working more closely together.
The unstated thing in that is that they're not currently aligned.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, which just raises a bunch of questions. We'd been wondering for a while when this was coming because it sure seemed like a weird thing not to get this up off the ground as quickly as possible and right away.
It's resources. With 2 MLAs, you get official party status in the BC legislature because once upon a time, the NDP only had that many, and they begrudged that they didn't get party status when they were the opposition of 2. And the Greens had 2 MLAs for a period after the 2017 election. They were 3 for a while, but fell down to 2. And so official party status in BC has remained 2, which when you had 3 independents, there's money on the table if you can get at least 2 of you together, and perks and abilities to perks within the legislature, abilities to join. I guess they don't have as many committees, but question period, for example.
Yeah, not only that, want to remain an MLA, you kind of need to win the upcoming election in your riding, and in order to do that, you kind of need a party apparatus to both support you and also do all the profile raising and branding that you need to actually effectively contest an election, because independents go nowhere in Canada.
Even small parties struggle, but it's harder.
You're better off with a small party.
Yeah. I don't have any deep insight from what I've heard. Jordan Keeley is the more amicable of the 3. He believes kind of the same things, but he's not an asshole about it. He is a character. He is in most photos wearing a cowboy hat. And I think tried to get to wear it in the legislature itself, which violated the sumptuarial rules, the dress code, because it's part of his culture. But Dallas Brody, I've heard not as pleasant things about in terms of dealing with her. So maybe it's just as simple as that they couldn't get along. And so Keeley wants to focus on his constituents and trying to be a good voice for them, which is admirable. More people could use that in their MLA. I know some journalists are working on this, and if they get those stories out soon, maybe we'll come back to this. But yeah, how do you like the brand 1BC?
I mean, the name's forgettable, kind of BC United-ish. I don't know. It's hard to throw up or come up with a name of a party. I'm sure they were throwing like a lot of things at the board on that one. On there, but they landed on something that's just kind of meh and forgettable. But I'm not sure if I would have necessarily come up with a better one, or can't come up with a better one off the top of my head right now.
A lot have been taken too, right? I think Freedom Party has been taken. Maybe People's Party was available, but maybe
you could do People's Party of BC, but is there the federal brand isn't strong enough to use that to carry you anywhere. When the Conservatives displaced BC United, they had the advantage that was a strong existing brand they could run with. And there isn't really one sitting out there.
They couldn't have taken a party of citizens who have decided to think for ourselves and be our own politicians, because that's still taken.
It's also a mouthful.
Their short name is Party of Citizens, which is still a weird name.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the name. The party logo feels very like 90s-esque BC iconography. Like if you were around back then, the way you probably remember like the provincial logos and stuff, and just how the dogwood was stylized looks almost identical to the one they've got, which I don't know what to make of that other than it's not exactly the most forward-facing setup on that.
So, yeah, they exist. We will probably forget about them for quite a while, but who knows? Maybe
probably this group doesn't seem like the kind that's going to basically be able to mastermind a splinter faction that's able to effectively take a sizable share of the BC Conservative vote.
I think it is worth noting it's not just the two MLAs behind the scenes. Former BC Conservative candidate Paul Ratchford's name was on the media release. Tim Thielman, also a Conservative candidate, is listed as the party's financial agent on its registration, because they are registered with BC Elections, but they are not registered with the Speaker's office yet, it sounded like, at least as of yesterday. I'm sure they'll sort that out.
They got till October to figure that out.
Yeah. They have had some other ex-BC Conservative candidates kind of hanging around.
Well, Thielman ran in Victoria. There's no real danger there of them doing anything to affect the Conservative chances, just they already don't have any.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if any of them have any strategic insights. Like, none of them won, obviously. But that was kind of the thing that allowed the BC Conservatives to go from zero to contesting, is collecting a lot of talent from disaffected BC Liberals, a lot of federal Conservatives, and just other right-wing strategists who'd been floating around looking for somewhere to put their ideas and energy.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a lot of the, professional strategists out there that are going to be finding the BC Conservatives too left-wing to work with, or really feeling the need to try and set up something to unseat them. Thielman, though, got a surprisingly high profile for a candidate in a can't possibly win riding. Like, I saw his name quite a bit during the election, and not for bozo eruption stuff, but doing a fairly good job of just getting the issues and the criticisms of the NDP on the stuff that mattered to Victoria in the news and get attention for that. So there might be something there. That's the political talent that I've seen that has the highest propensity for success, I would say. But he'd also been hanging around this group for a while, and it's not clear that's led to anything spectacular on it.
I'm just looking him up right now in his latest Twitter post, because all these people are still very active on Twitter, is that, no, we won't slash taxes. We will massacre taxes and combine that with an obliteration of wasteful spending and regulations. So they're just really leaning into the government should not exist level of right-wing libertarianism.
Yeah, I guess the Libertarian Party was us already taken.
Yes. They have been around for a while. So, yeah. Unsurprising development, other than the fact Keeley's not involved. So we'll keep an eye on
Or
him.
the fact that it took so long.
Yeah. Paperwork is hard when you don't believe in government.
It shouldn't be that hard to get something up and running. Which also, goes to show that I'm not sure anyone should be too worried about them. They're the Conservatives, so they're taking this long to get set up.
Speaking of paperwork being hard, apparently the government of BC is unsurprisingly bad at responding to paperwork, specifically freedom of information requests, not just the average ones you or I send, but ones from Information and Privacy Commissioner Michael Harvey are also getting ignored, as he had to take the province to court to get a court order to get documents from the provincial health order, from the provincial health authority.
Yeah, that's wild.
I believe it a lot, having filed FOIs and ATIPs and seeing extensions. The health ministry is really bad at you automatically get told that they need to give an extension, and the second, I think they're allowed to ask for one, and then the second time they might say, "Oh, can we have an extension, Scott?" And it's kind of implied you have to say yes, but you don't. Although in some cases they just don't respond. I was mentioning to you over Slack that there was one ATIP I put in early 2020, and then the pandemic happened, and this was to the federal government, and they'd already asked for an extension, and then COVID happened, and I was like, fine, extensions are happening for everyone. And then it was years, because I forget about these things, and a couple years ago, or in the fall, they were like, do you still want these records? And I'm like, you're damn right I do, now that you reminded me of them. And they didn't get back to me on that. And now I'm just extra annoyed that these agencies do not like to do the basics of the law they are required to do.
Yeah, that's wildly long. So how many years? That'd be what, 5 years?
It's 5 now. It's 5.5 years.
Yeah, it should not take that long to dig up some information on it. The public service grown federally by 40% over the last decade. Surely one of them could get you an answer for that. And the BC public service also grown a fair bit. I'm sure they could find someone to come and answer these requests. I mean, what is the health ministry doing right now that is taking up? Is the closing of a bunch of rural ERs taking up so much of their time they can't handle this?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's frustrating. And also, if the NDP is in theory the party of government in this province, and they sure seem uninterested in actually making it work effectively based on stuff like this, or the disaster that is keeping hospital staffed, or anything like that.
The thing with privacy law like this freedom of information law more specifically, is it tends to only get touched by a government when the government changes and there's some scandal in the previous government of not being transparent enough, and the new one wants to make a show of improving transparency.
Well, not just that. doesn't have anything they don't want public yet.
Exactly. And by making things more public, they can further embarrass the last guys. But, man, this system's such a mess. So, I don't know. We'll link to the Tyee article that's got more details on this specific story. But it's kind of just another one of those reminders that reminders that our system is not working well. In terms of other systems that will probably get FOI'd is over at BC Ferries, they had their big announcement this week of who's going to build the next 4 ferries they want as part of the, what does they call it? The new major vessel program. Basically, the big ferries, the ones everyone's taken to Vancouver Island. We need new ones. And BC Ferries wanted 5. They got the money to order 4. And so they did their procurement process and selected China Merchants Industry Weihai Shipyards, and say, cool, we'll go with them. And unsurprisingly, a bunch of politicians you went with who?
Yeah, this is also a state-owned shipbuilder in China. So, yeah, not only did a Chinese company, that is the Chinese government getting paid to build these, which I'm sure is a significant factor in the blowback on this. There was always, I think, going to be some pushback whenever a ferry contract goes elsewhere. The 2 newer classes of ships that come in the one size down. The Salish and Island classes were built in Europe. What feels to me like the new ferries, but I realize they're almost 20 years old now. The coastal class that came in just before the Olympics, they were built in Germany. So it's been a while since we've done a domestically sourced ferry, but the outcry on those were significantly less.
Yeah, the initial reaction here, Mike Farnworth said we shouldn't be doing deals with countries that are harming our economic interests. We're in a trade war. I think it's one of those who started it kind of situations, but that is an existing thing. The Conservatives
it was only a couple of years ago the Chinese government kidnapped 2 citizens and basically ransomed them to try and affect the extradition process for Meng Wanzhou. There's been a bunch of Chinese government-linked cyber attack, not necessarily done directly by them, but by proxy groups hitting Canada and allies. Like, not a friendly country to Canada, just in general.
The Conservatives also asked, why aren't we building them here? Why are we giving these jobs away? And notably, no Canadian shipyards bid on this contract, according to BC Ferries, which you could then argue maybe the way they wrote it precluded Canadian shipbuilders, or realistically, they're all actually quite busy.
Yeah, we're kind of in that phase of the cycle where there's just a bunch of federal government contracts going through right now for various Navy and Coast Guard ships. That's taken up a lot of the fairly limited domestic shipbuilding capacity. That's a good thing. A lot of the system and ships they're replacing are pretty old, but in their traditional way of going about it tends to be these boom and bust cycles rather than, keeping a consistent multi-decade order book in place to slowly rotate through them, which does also preclude them from, when something like this comes up, either having the capacity or needing to kind of rebuild after the stuff's atrophied for a while. It's not a great setup we've got in terms of keeping what's arguably a strategic industry stable.
Yeah. It's such a fraught decision all around, right? Especially in BC's history, and for the BC NDP in particular.
Yeah, they've never had troubles with ferries before.
Yeah, this question of how much political influence do we want to have on shipbuilding contracts? And you could go zero and you end up like this, or you could go too much and you end up in a ill-sighted scheme like the fast ferries. And I think the question is, what's the right balance? Because it's not a purely economic decision to some extent. For BC Ferries, it is, right? They're a private company with a majority shareholder that just happens to be the BC government.
Not just the majority shareholder, the sole shareholder.
The sole shareholder.
And it was Rob Shaw that pointed this out, that pretty much the entire board are either ex-NDP people or people with very close connections to the NDP. So, independence is in the eye of the beholder on that one.
So I guess the question is, do you let them make the RFP process based on purely what is the most economical, best return on investment kind of bid? Who gives us the best bid? And there's a few other additionals in here: international site visits, third-party reference checks, and so forth. Or do you what kind of constraints do you put on that from the political lens? And the more you put on, the more expensive it's going to get, the more risk it has of blowing up in the government's face. Although this also does a little bit.
Yeah, this is currently blowing back on them a bit. I don't think they've really figured out the exact right answer on that one. Some version of, we're going to, limit the scope to countries we're fairly friendly with, would probably have avoided the strongest blowback. Korea, major shipbuilder. I think, if I recall correctly, second to China in terms of tonnage that gets built there. We don't know because we don't have the list of who bid on this, but that would be an option. Go back to the couple European countries that built the last couple ships for BC Ferries. Anyway, I'm really curious to see who actually bid on this one.
Yeah. At very least, if this all goes through, we'll get some new ferries in the water within 5 or 6 years to replace some of the ones they're planning to retire. But if they fuck around with it, add a few years to that. Possibly. Speaking of getting things built, let's jump to the federal scene where we got the final bill that we were looking forward to at the end of last week, just after recording the... what's the full name of this one? It's the One Canadian Economy, an Act to enact the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act and the Build in Canada Act. It's another omnibus bill, Scott.
Yeah, although at least this one's more focused on the last omnibus bill we talked about. It's two basic bills, and there's a pretty strong connection between them on this. So this is both we're going to have free trade in Canada by Canada Day bill. Not likely to pass by then or really be enacted, but let's strip out what we can from the federal level that's interfering with internal trade. So they're going to do stuff like if there's a provincial regulation or certification that's substantively similar to the federal one, that they'll just consider it as having met the federal requirements rather than having to go through the process federally, which all seems reasonable. Just doing more of those mutual recognition points should significantly help the various friction points on that. And then there's the Built in Canada Act, which is the basically Government of Canada spin on Bill 15 or from BC or Bill 5 from Ontario.
I would say it's much different than Bill 5 in Ontario. We're not getting special economic zones nationally.
Not quite, but it's the the same basic premise underlines all three bills, which is, man, there's a lot of process and regulation that's actually just stopping us from building the important projects we need in this country or province as applicable. So we need a way to put a process in place for the really important ones so they can get through in a quicker, more expedited way with fewer hurdles on that. And we're going to do this not by doing the hard work of going in and fixing the underlying processes that implicitly in the argument for this bills we all agree is broken and not serving the Canadian interest. We're instead going to basically do the pick and choose and let government pick favorites and help them along that way.
Yeah, the federal one's unique in that, like the others, they will designate projects to move forward, but in this case, they are conditionally approved up front, which means instead of asking whether it gets built, it's just how we get this built. So this pipeline or this highway or whatever project that's within the federal jurisdiction will get the yes, and then we'll figure out the details to make everyone happy after. They, like the other provinces, in this one they're actually saying they will do a full consultation with affected Indigenous peoples up front, and that has to be a part of the evaluation process for which projects get this designation, as well as they have a couple other criteria here: strengthening Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security, provide economic or other benefits to Canada, have a high likelihood of success, and contribute to clean growth objectives with respect to climate change, which are criteria not as well laid out in BC's law, as far as I remember. BC's was just kind of vibes-based, although the province, I think, was going to put these out in regulations, which was part of the criticism of BC's bill.
So in the press release they put out, they specifically identified schools and hospitals, and that was the main one they identified, but I'm sure if I was to dig through a little more, there'd be a couple other ones that I came out. I definitely remember coming across.
Well, that's what they said they would designate as Category 1 projects, but in the bill itself, it doesn't actually define what criteria the minister should use to decide what is a Category 1 project or a provincially significant infrastructure as Category 2. They kind of just implied, trust us, this is what we're going to use this for. Yeah. Which brought a ream of criticisms down. So I don't think
I've got the list here. It's public infrastructure, critical minerals, food or water security, human health safety, energy security, post-disaster recovery, First Nations partnership or benefits, trade diversification, access to new markets, supply chain security, replacing U.S. imports, climate goals, and housing. So it's
kind of everything.
Kind of everything on that. It covers a pretty wide range of items on there.
And like the criteria, I think, as I read Bill C5 here, aren't mandatory. It's kind of here's what we're kind of looking at, but you're also like, there's no requirement it meets all of these. So
yeah, they want to build like a giant AI data center. They can just choose to do so.
Well, because that provides economic benefits, maybe. Maybe it's successful. The other part of this bill on the major project side will be the creation of the one project, one review office to assess or do the assessments and reduce decision timelines from 5 years down to 2 years. It's still kind of TBD how that's going to look, but it's the first step of creating that, I guess.
So yeah, all in, like, I'm generally supportive of the aims of this one. It's the how they're going about it by we get to pick winners and losers rather than let's make a process where we can just build the necessary infrastructure we need because our regulations are generally aligned with producing high quality infrastructure in a timely and cost effective manner for the benefit of Canadians. Part that I wish was being done instead.
Yeah, the opposition to this is muted. The Indigenous groups are hesitant. I saw the AFN planning to host an emergency roundtable to discuss it. There's the standard, we don't want to see a bill that tramples UNDRIP and the rights of Indigenous people and treaty rights and so forth. There was a call by, I think, the Bloc to split this bill into two and debate them one after the other. The Conservatives seem largely supportive, but might have some desire for one or the other to go a little bit farther. Which is all to say there's not like a strong will to push this all through Parliament. So that kind of reaches that question of, will it pass by July 1st? And complicated bills in a minority situation are difficult, as we've seen for the past 5 years. But one of the things the government is trying to do, according to National Observer and Alexandre Boularice, is bring forward a motion, what the NDP have termed a super motion, that would basically create one committee to study this bill with a fixed timeline that they would then have to report back quickly to the House of Commons. And by, I think, the 20th of June, where it would then be debated until it is either passed or rejected, and Parliament would just keep arguing. And maybe the opposition tries to filibuster it, maybe they don't. But the idea is, here's Carney's way to push this bill through and see if he can get the votes on this super motion, which was supposed to happen today, but it sounds like they may have delayed it till Monday because the Bloc and NDP conspired to procedural shenanigan it to Monday.
It's inventive. I'll give Carney that. Though for the NDP, like, if you're going to try and oppose something, try not to give it a cool name.
Super motion.
Yeah, if anything, it like boosts it up on there. They really need to be branded it as something that sounds more sinister than a super motion.
It's also kind of funny because they talked about how it violates the rights of parliamentarians. And it's like, well, the Liberals don't have a majority, and they need a majority to pass this quote-unquote super motion. And so if they get that majority, like, that's how parliamentary democracy works, is you can vote away your rights.
Yeah.
To debate.
But I could also see this, imagine the next time around we have a majority government, and then based on this precedent, they basically use that for all the bills going forward. I could really see opposition parties seeing that as something that undermines their ability to hold the government account or properly interrogate legislation.
Harper got that shit for times of he invoked closure, which he did, not on every bill, but at times, because sometimes you are a majority government and you just say, screw it, let's just get our bills passed. And that pisses people off, understandably. But sometimes you eat that criticism, and that is politics. So I'm not sure how particularly unique of a attempt this is by Carney, but it's relatively novel compared to where Trudeau, especially in the latter half, had been.
Yeah, in the first part, they used time allocation quite a bit to try and get things through or limit debate.
So yeah, I'm curious to see how the Conservatives come down on this. They sound relatively supportive. All the parties did get behind the tax cut bill, or the Making Canada Affordable and changing the Elections Act privacy rules bill.
Not a huge surprise on that one. Everyone had pretty much committed to at least the tax cut portion during the election, and I don't think any of the parties were sad that they were going to have the less stringent privacy rules applied to them compared to BC trying to push them all to follow the BC standard.
Yeah. Well, building projects moving big projects forward isn't the only thing the federal government is up to. Also this week, Mark Carney announced we are going to accelerate our defense spending with about $10 billion more this year to hit 2% GDP spending by December 31st.
Yeah, this was a bit of a surprise. If you pay attention during the election or the Liberal leadership race, it really seemed like everyone was kind of on the 2030-ish timeline on that, with basically the debate being, do we hit 2% by 2030 or 2032? Turns out it's going to be 10 months from now.
Yeah, no one in the election was like, hey, you know what we should do? Hit 2% this year.
Yeah, so this is definitely bold. I'll give that, and actually probably responded with the importance and speed that's actually needed rather than dragging this out another decade. The 2% target was agreed to at the 2014 NATO summit, so we're 11 years late on getting around to this. Probably not a good idea to add another 7 onto that as well. And further piss off our allies and weaken our position within the alliance and diplomatically with all of them. That said, it's going to be a significant challenge to get that up and going. That's a lot of extra money. Some of that's coming from a bit of a reclassification of various existing programs. Notably, the Coast Guard is now getting added to the defense spending accounting on that. And we're also given the military a 20% pay bump. And there's a bunch of longer term programs that are announced in this, but not this is something that can easily go out the door in the next few months. What I am hopeful, though, is that a lot of this is going to end up, at least the next year or two spending is going to be in items such as just repairing and refurbishing a bunch of both defense infrastructure. The various bases are in not great repair. In addition to that, a lot of the equipment is pretty terrible shape. Carney noted in his press conference that 1 of 4 submarines is currently seaworthy. About half the rest of the fleet is serviceable. Less than half of the Army's equipment is in a serviceable state. So there's just a lot of work that can be done getting through the decades and years of deferred maintenance on a whole bunch of things, which would significantly increase readiness levels.
Yeah, in the backgrounder on this, they talk about $844 million going to repairing and sustaining capabilities. The biggest chunk of funds, $2.6 billion, is towards recruitment and retention. So I think that would include the salary hike, but also an effort to get 13,000 more regular and reserve members.
Yeah, fits in the process is going to be a huge part of that. It's a very long and drawn out process where their recruiting centers, or for their reservist units themselves, their recruiting officers haven't been, in my experience, super responsive or quick on it. It's a long process to go through, and the military hasn't always been super helpful in getting people through that in a timely manner on there, which certainly presents some challenges. And the early career attrition is the highest in the forces, so definitely a lot of improvements can be made on the intake and training and all of that aspect of it. I'm not sure the pay itself is going to make a huge difference. At the margin, of course, you pay people more money, they're more likely to stick around. But generally, my understanding is when people leave in the forces, do exit interviews, or when surveys are conducted of service members about the factors that are pushing them towards leaving the forces. Pay generally doesn't come top of the list on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, long term, there's going to be a bunch of additional capabilities the government's looking to require. Identified in this specific programs included Arctic over-the-horizon radar, a joint counter-drone program, which is interesting and rather timely, considering what we just saw happen in Russia, and is probably the sure sign of this, that this is a government that isn't just doing a bots checking exercise on this, but is pretty seriously looking at how warfare is evolving and what Canada needs to keep pace with that. Next up would be joint support ships. That's part of what's taken up the shipyard capacity. Long-range precision strike capability, which sounds like we're probably going to be buying whatever the European or Korean version of HIMARS are, would be my guess on that. As well as increased domestic ammunition production and various vehicles for the Army.
On the spending side, specifics on the background, there's $1 billion to expanding and enhancing existing and emerging military capabilities. That reaches some of the things you just talked about. $2.1 billion to promote a defense industrial strategy to basically start doing a lot more production in Canada. And that's something that could have a lot of spin-off benefits. I mean, one thing that could be nice about boosting military pay is like the upward pressure on wage inflation that could have for other workers. I don't know if it's going to be that significant, but...
Well, I'm sure every Dodge Ram dealer within a 50-mile radius of a base is salivating at this.
Sell so many F-150s.
And Charger, yeah. The Dodge dealers will be happy.
And the most vague thing in this breakdown of the spending is the $2 billion for defense partnerships beyond the U.S. It doesn't say like what that means other than just trying to build new partnerships with $2 billion.
So separate reporting from this is that Canada is looking to join the European rearmament program that's going on. So that's primarily my read on this, is that that's going to basically go into those programs there. And that would, both help us secure needed equipment and perhaps give us more access to the European market in terms of our domestic production being sold there.
That's better than joining the Golden Dome and saying, there we go, we hit 2% because we just threw all our money at crazy shit.
Yeah, I don't think we can really join the Golden Dome with the money that's used to diversify away from the U.S.
No.
On that.
Yeah.
We're also getting a Canadian DARPA that is, I'm not going to try and read off the name, but it's basically abbreviated to Borealis and is this big, long name that's clearly trying to backfit the acronym on that.
I mean, DARPA was kind of backfitting the acronym.
Was it? Like, it emerged out of the ARPA, the Advanced Research Project. I don't think anyone was sitting around saying, it's a great name, ARPA. What can we figure out that fits in there?
But, yeah, this is an interesting announcement. It was quite surprising, and it really begs where is the budget? Because this is a lot of money to just, it's very easy to say, hey, look, $10 billion, boom, we hit it. See, we could have done it anytime. But we also just got a tax cut.
Yeah.
And we were promised a balanced budget in 3 years. So the math ain't mathin' yet.
No, it's going to be a challenge on that. The one thing that will be doing for Carney when he delivers that, or has his finance minister do it, is he did promise to break out capital from operating on here. And there's a lot of capital in this, at least over the longer term on that. But yeah, we definitely need a budget on there. And yeah, for the operations part of this, we should absolutely be figuring out how to do that in a balanced budget way. The capital expenditures are a little more understandable to be putting up on the debt, because those are long-term acquisitions that will give us assets we'll be using for quite a while.
So,
yeah. I also don't think the timing's a coincidence, putting this right before the G7. There's a NATO conference coming up later in the year too, and this is probably also being done for the diplomatic reasons. I think a lot of Canadians were pretty shocked or annoyed that when all the 51st state stuff was happening, that the Europeans didn't really seem all that interested in wading into that conversation to support Canada in it. And I strongly suspect at least part of it is that Canada's not done a great job maintaining those relationships, in part because we generally have not been a good ally. We've shirked our commitments that we made over a decade ago, and have generally been very dismissive whenever the allies raise their concerns on that. So as we're going forward and recalibrating our foreign policy in a future where we're going to need to rely on the non-North American allies a lot more, and those relationships become more important, doing this stuff to help rebuild that connection and trust is going to be important. But also on that NATO conference that's coming up, there's already talk about revising that target upward. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General and former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, has been talking about a 5% target, where 3.5 of that is on pure defense aspects, and the other 1.5 is on more general expenditures that have dual purpose or other security things. So infrastructure that can have a defense purpose would be in that,
like trains.
Yeah, trains are an important one.
Trains are really good, Scott. We all agree.
Yeah, if you need to move a lot of tanks a far distance, the best thing to do is put them on a train.
It's how Trump gets to have his parade. He had to train in tanks because...
Well, when NATO repositioned its forces after Russia started making moves on its neighbors, the tanks and other equipment going from Western Europe to Eastern Europe showed up there on the back of trains. But all of this is to say is this might get us back in line with what the alliance expects of us, but we may end up finding ourselves in a different position in a couple of years as that likely to change. And 2014, the world was a much different place with a much different security environment and geopolitical environment. And if 2% made sense then, there's a solid argument it's not necessarily going to make sense in 2025. So it's
also arbitrary. It's like the number was arbitrary then. 5% even more arbitrary, and just feeding a complex of continual weaponization and growth. And I don't like it. And I'll just say that we don't need to argue it because we got 5 minutes left. I want to talk about the G7.
Yeah, let's pivot to the other big international foreign affairs thing.
Because Carney hasn't been doing as well as the precursor to that, as it came out that he first invited Narendra Modi, who accepted and is coming. India, not in the G7. Also, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was also invited, but he's not going to come. He doesn't tend to leave home much. So I don't know if it was he doesn't want to come to Canada, or he just doesn't want to leave. He's got a nice castle or whatever you call it.
Palace,
yeah, makes sense. But it does raise a lot of questions from people who go, hey, why are we inviting these kind of people, these kind of leaders to Canada? especially as Global News released another story that India had been trailing Jagmeet Singh for the past 18 months to the point where he considered quitting. It was so stressful. He had to hide in a basement one day because his security detail was worried that something might happen to him. I'll link the story in there. But it seems Carney is churning the page with India. He's raising the concerns about, has India killed Canadians on Canadian soil? But the need to diversify away from the U.S. makes interesting allies, I guess.
Yeah, like there's a realpolitik argument on this that in international relations you don't always get to choose to deal with the nicest people.
Like when you're ordering ferries.
But this is a pretty significant departure from, the same government effectively's position 6 months ago. Now, it's a departure from what liberals were saying in the election when one of the arguments leveled against Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives is they were too inclined to be nice to Modi and the Indian government on that. And yeah, I'm just left wondering, like, what is Canada's foreign policy? What is the Carney strategy or the Carney doctrine? Because you can certainly justify that on pragmatic terms. I was also reported that Carney's looking to reset the China relationship as well. If we also want to talk about another country that has harmed our citizens.
He's shifted a little bit on Israel relations, but I don't think that's as dramatic. It's kind of more of a trend we saw under Trudeau of like increasing frustration or rhetoric of frustration at Israel's conduct in the war on Gaza, to the point where Canada has just sanctioned 2 senior Israeli ministers, not for anything to do with Gaza, for their support of violence in the West Bank illegal West Bank settlements. But we also signed on to a letter with UK and France calling or threatening further sanctions if Israel doesn't tone it down a bit. So like there's slight shifts there. It's all left wondering what is the Carney view on the world?
Yeah, that's what I really want to know on this, and I don't have a great answer on it because it's not entirely clear. And particularly when it comes to India and to a lesser extent China, like where's the point where something's over the line, or where it's the relationship gets damaged to the point where it's going to take a long time to recover? Because I don't know, it sure seems like an extrajudicial killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil would be the sort of thing that would be over the line. Yet Bloomberg today reported that we're apparently set to strike a deal with them on sharing intelligence and police investigation information related to terrorism and crime.
But also extrajudicial killing, Scott, conveniently.
Yeah, that almost sounds more like a face-saving thing for Canada to like put in the text of the announcement there, because if India or any other countries plan on doing one, I don't think they're going to tell the country where that's going to happen ahead of time. Maybe if their intelligence service picks up that Pakistan is going to be thinking about doing that, they might forward that one, but doesn't strike me as credible.
The invitation and this deal have, even set off people within the Liberal Party. Prominent MP Sukh Dhaliwal and others are speaking to the CBC, calling it literally, quote, a bad idea to have Modi at the G7. Modi is not the only non-G7 leader at the G7. There's like 8 other senior leaders from everywhere from like the UN and EU general secretaries to I think Brazil and Australia's prime ministers will also be there, and a bunch of others. So it's a diverse group. It's the G7 plus everyone's two best friends.
Yeah.
And India.
Yeah, I heard one person describe it as like the G7 or G20 minus China. I also think part of this might be that it's pretty well known that Trump's not a big fan of multilateralism and prefers to do bilateral deals where, he holds more of the cards. So it might be an attempt to balance off against that and push it into a more multilateral role. You could even make the argument that if you were making the G7 today, that honestly Canada probably wouldn't make the cut. We're just not that important anymore. And even when it was first being put together, we kind of got in there because the US didn't want to be in a room with just a bunch of Europeans and no one else from North America on it. And that, a G7 being set up today probably would have India in there instead of us. But yeah, there's a bunch of ways to interpret that, but the problem punditing on that is without a clear idea of what the Canadian foreign policy actually is, it's hard to really make an assessment of that. Under Trudeau, it was show up to a lot of big international events, give a somewhat preaching statement that's very values heavy, and then make yourself pretty scarce when it comes time to commit significant resources to it. Carney seems to be a little more, we're here to get stuff done. We've seen that with a bunch of the legislation announcements we've talked about this week and last, but when it comes to the foreign policy, it's not clear what the it is that's he's trying to get done.
I guess we'll see what speech he gives. Presumably he will, as the host, give some kind of speech at G7, and that might be our best glimpse, because I don't think we're going to get like a nice thorough white paper for everyone to pick apart and disagree with. But
even a speech or just some kind of clarifying what Canada's actual foreign policy goals are would be helpful.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.